Donald Trump has a vision to make America great again, and part of that vision is to put more money in people's back pockets. Now you may think to yourself, there is no way the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, the government as a whole, there's no way they want us to have more money. But you'd be wrong. Primarily because if more money ends up in the public's back pockets, they are more likely to be financially stable and they're more likely to have higher disposable incomes that they can then spend in shops, on online e-commerce platforms, starting up businesses, investing, whatever it may be. With more disposable income, they can then try and stimulate more GDP growth. That is the plan. However, a precursor to this involves the Trump administration taking many difficult decisions. Primarily, of course, what's going on with the tariffs as of right now. But many Americans are increasingly concerned about the rising prices, whether it's in food, whether it's with home prices, car prices, utility bills, whatever it may be. Concerns are increasing, but the Trump administration have made every effort to reassure us we will have more money in our back pockets at the end of the term. Is this likely? Will this happen? Well, this is what we're going to break down in this video today, but before we do, it takes just 2 seconds. If you're new around here and you enjoy these kind of updates, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button down below. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, prices are going up, wages look to be remaining flat, and we're 2 months into Donald Trump's second term in office. At the moment, 2025 is not really feeling like a year of optimism. But take a look at this. The US is currently a paycheck to paycheck nation, with 59% of Americans saying they wouldn't be able to cover a $1,000 expense with their savings. We've touched on this before on this channel, when we looked at the report published by Bankrates on the average emergency funds that Americans have to date. But less Americans are saving money because they're having to dip more into their savings to fund their everyday lives. And why? Because they don't have enough money. On average, if you look at an American savings account, it's going to be close to zero. But in stark contrast to that, if you look at their credit card usage and their credit card debts, that is going to be sky high. And the amount of debt they accrue on top of that with the interest is also going to be through the roof. According to the New York Federal Reserve, Americans' credit card debt reached an all-new record high. So more Americans are ending up in debt because they don't have the money in their savings account to pay for any unforeseen expenses or their monthly bills. That's just the type of nation America is at the moment. Now granted, the IRS is indeed issuing tax rebates to many Americans, but this is a short-term gain. This won't put more money in their back pocket in the long term. So when you factor all of that into the equation, it's pretty safe to assume the American people need money. And the Trump administration is very well aware of this. But the fact remains, for them to implement what they're trying to do and give more money back to the American public, their policies and their strategies need time. I mean, here are some of the promises that he's made so far. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime pay, renew the tax cuts that he had in place in his first term, close carried interest loopholes, and tax cuts for products that are made in America. Now, while policies like that sound good on paper, there are 1 or 2 issues that would be pretty prevalent if these bills were to indeed pass. For example, with no tax on overtime pay. If that bill is to pass, if that is made in law, then all of a sudden, you could see a dramatic change in the mindsets of employers. For example, they may no longer be willing to hire someone that's only willing to work the bare minimum number of contracted hours per week. Let's say in the contracts, the employer says they need to work a minimum of 30 hours a week. Now, compare that to someone who's willing to work 60 hours a week. Again, remember, no tax on overtime. All of a sudden, employers could then give priority to the person willing to work more hours. They'll favor the person working 60 hours as opposed to the person working 30 hours. Because now, instead of asking someone to work overtime, people are now going to be wanting to do that willingly because there's an incentive, there's a tax incentive for them to do so. But this could also lead to employers taking things a step further and saying, we're offering our employee $25 an hour during normal contracted hours. But what about during overtime? We could maybe offer him $20 an hour, $15 an hour during overtime. And he'll feel like he's winning simply because there's no tax on overtime now. But at the same time, we're getting the same level of work ethic, productivity, and the same service from him as we would be getting if he was on $25 an hour. We've reduced his salary during overtime, but we're getting the same level of productivity and service for a lower wage during overtime. So there's this fine divide between who is winning here. Is it the employee? Is it the employer? Is it both of them? What is the balance? Very interesting. But then there's also this side of things. Americans are tired of tipping, and experts say that no tax on tips could make things worse. Now I confess, I used to work in the hospitality sector when I was younger as a waiter, and I did love it every time I received a tip, so I can't complain from that side of things. But here's what I want to point out here. If we get to a point where there are no longer any taxes on tips, who's to say that waiting staff, hospitality staff, can't make a living based on the tips alone? Because then an argument could be made to say someone could tip them $50, someone could tip them $100. I mean, being very generous, but simple maths. At that point, people could then make an argument to say, why don't we just lower the minimum wage or get rid of it altogether? That's the real danger with saying there are no taxes on tips, or we're not going to have any taxes on tips moving forward. We could get to a point where restaurants put up signs or let people know that their waiting staff basically rely on their tips to make a living and survive. But this is what the Trump administration is planning, and who knows? Maybe it could work out better for everyone. No taxes on tips, no taxes on social security benefits, no taxes on overtime. Who knows what this will do for the American economy? But that's not all. And this one right here is what I think personally is the biggest factor of them all. Take a look at this. Donald Trump promised a cap on credit card interest rates. Here's his chance. Senators Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley say they will propose a 10% limit on credit card interest rates. Do you remember what we said at the start of this video? Credit card debt has reached an all-time record high. This is a very big deal. But let's have a read of this. 2 senators plan to introduce a bill on Tuesday, this was a couple of weeks ago, to impose a tight cap on credit card interest rates, reviving a proposal that is sure to draw howls from banks and other lenders. And again, with credit card debt being at an all-time high, it's no wonder the institutions issuing the debt would be unhappy. But let's go on. The idea received new life in September when President Trump, then on the campaign trail, said he supported a temporary 10% limit on credit card interest rates while working Americans catch up. This will give people breathing space. Now, as the article points out, banks will be livid when this kicks off, when this does eventually become law, because it means that their control over the people they issue the debt to is significantly reduced. But Americans, the average American, will be delighted, because it means they don't have to spend as much of their savings paying off the interest on those credit cards. For example, let's say the average American had $5,000 worth of credit card debts, and the interest rates prior to any limit being set were at 20%. So, 20% of $5,000 is $1,000. Americans would have to pay back the original $5,000 that they took out in credit card debts, plus an additional $1,000 on top. So they're paying back $6,000 in total. But if President Trump and the other senators pass this bill, then all of a sudden, the rate reduces from 20% to 10%, and Americans would then pay back 10% of $5,000 instead of 20% of $5,000. So, 10% of $5,000 is $500, add that to the original $5,000 they took out in credit card debts, they would pay back $5,500. $500 less than they would have paid back when the interest rates were at 20%. So, they've got $500 more dollars in their back pockets. But when you look at everything in the grand scheme of things, you then start to understand the links between all of the actions that the Trump administration are taking here. For example, we spoke before about what Trump is doing with the tariffs, and with the tariffs that he's putting in place on Mexico and China specifically, going to drive up the prices of goods at home for the Americans. Now, you look at what Trump's doing with limiting the interest rate on credit cards, it means more money in the back pocket for Americans. So, He is trying to offset the short-term pain that the American people will feel, while both he and his administration will try and figure this out. And you add that to the tax cuts as well that are being put in place to give people the chance to earn more money without fear of the IRS knocking on their door demanding their fair share of tax. Now, again, short-term pain from the tariffs, but more money in Americans' back pockets to make it easier for them to deal with the problems and deal with the higher prices. Now, whether that's done because Americans willingly want to work overtime, or if they have no choice but to work overtime to survive, that's a separate issue entirely. But the key thing to note here is all of this, at this moment in time, is all talk. It's all hyperbole. Until we start to see significant actions being put in place and bills passing that make this vision a reality, this will be all it is, just talk. So we need to wait and see what happens over the coming year. Of course, when people have more money in their pockets, they can spend more money, they have more disposable income, they can go out to the shops, they can go out, buy clothes, shoes, buy a car, buy a home, whatever it may be. If people have more money, they can afford to do those things. But for the time being, this is looking like short-term pain with a view to long-term prosperity. But let's see what happens. 2025 is a long old year. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Drop a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the situation. I'd love to hear from you all. I'll be returning soon in the coming weeks, but until then, see you all later and take care.